A man was walking in the woods one day when he saw a bear out of the corner of his eye. He stopped, said a silent prayer. God, I know you can do all things. Will you please make this bear a fellow Christian? The bear caught up to the man, placed his paw on the man's shoulder, and said, Brother, will you pray with me? Dear God, for this meal that I am about to receive, make me truly thankful. This is the Christian Bear with Dr. Ben Hilskamp. Welcome to episode 20 of the Christian Bear. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Hilskamp. Today we return to our series on belief, taking our cue from my personal Credo. And make sure you stay around at the end for a special announcement about future episodes from the Christian Bear. Today I'm addressing the following proposition. I believe in community and in ritual. Humans are social creatures who gather in communities for fellowship, strength, and belonging. Some of these communities are religious and spiritual. Some of them are cultural, ethnic. Some are communities that are chosen by people. Others are forced upon them. Rituals have place in those communities. Whether or not these rituals impart grace, bring a person closer to God, or are necessary for salvation is entirely the purview of each individual believer. What works for me might not work for you. What works for you might not work for me. We often hear in our largely digital, largely virtual, particularly during the pandemic, that our culture, that our US culture, that our Western culture has become largely devoid of community. We spend too much time on our cell phones. Even when we're gathered around the same table, how many families, how many groups of friends find everyone on their phone? How many of us have had the moment when, though the person is literally across the table or next to us, we end up texting them out of habit? And while these things are funny in the moment, they reinforce this notion that community, that conversation, that breaking bread with other humans is no longer something that is prioritized by humans. And while in part I agree with that, I also think that there is a deep human desire to form community. We may or may not do that well, and there are plenty of communities, be those religious, organizational, social, cultural, ethnic families themselves, that have often done very poorly of encouraging community. Still, nevertheless, we look for these communities. Wherever we go as humans, we try to find community. We find something special in being with other people. And at times, once we have been with those people for a certain period of time, or when we find those people in certain contexts, we want to ritualize our time together. And ritualize may bring up thoughts of religious ceremonies, but those are only one form of ritual. Ritual can be as simple as getting together every Tuesday morning for coffee with a group of friends. When I was in college, there were a group of us who almost every day ate breakfast together. Yes, we were friends. Yes, we probably would have spent time together in the morning anyway, but it was our tradition, our ritual, if you will, to get breakfast together. In college as well, there was a group of us who sponsored or held a certain table available 2 or 3 days a week for conversation among like-minded peers and colleagues, including professors. Those are forms of ritual. Those are forms of gathering together, of sharing a meal, of talking, acting in a certain way, that while, again, may not be ceremony, are nevertheless ritual. We can even consider our morning routines, the time we spend with our family before we go to work, the time we spend by ourselves before we engage in our day. Those are rituals. Many of us are creatures of habit. We like routine. or we know the value of routine even if we don't necessarily like it. Routine is a form of ritual. And I think once we realize how much ritual goes into how we form communities, we also recognize the importance of ritualizing, of making routine and making and normalizing these certain actions we have in communities and in different communities. I'm one of those people who wants all my friends to know all my other friends. And I admit that at different points in my life, this has caused some issues and probably will continue to cause issues. Some of my friends simply don't play nicely with some of my other friends. And I imagine I'm not alone in that. But again, some of these friendships are based on common rituals, are based on common routines, are based on common traits, common ideas that may or may not transition well between groups. I imagine many of you have experienced this as well with your families. Who you are, what you do, how you act around your family may be very different than who you are, how you act, and how you behave around your group of friends at home. And while we can look at that as a bad thing, as being inauthentic, as being a type of code switching, as being environments in which we cannot be our full self, nevertheless, it is once again based in ritual. There are certain things, there are certain events that are unique to our experience with a particular group. And not having had that experience, not having had that routine or that ritual, puts us out of place when it comes to interacting with other people or other groups. So I believe in community, and I believe in ritual, and I believe in the place that ritual and routine have in building and maintaining communities. Those rituals, again, do not need to be religious. They do not need to be ceremonial. They do not need to be particularly profound in any way. They simply need to be there. When I started this episode, I said to stay tuned for the end, to stay tuned for a special announcement. I'm happy to announce that beginning in mid-October, as I wrap up my discussion of my own beliefs, I will begin to have guests on the Christian Bear. This will be the first time that I welcome guests onto the podcast. Each guest is going to be asked approximately 4 of the same questions to talk about their own beliefs. These episodes will be the credo of that person. Some of these folks are highly religious, who believe in very religious, some might even say conservative beliefs. Others are very progressive and religious. Others still are atheists, are agnostic, are humanist. So many will be Christian, but also some will come from other faiths. And I'm really excited to welcome these people both to the podcast, but also just in general to share their beliefs, their structures, their rituals, their communities. So look forward to that again about mid-October. And thank you for joining us today on The Christian Bear. This has been The Christian Bear with Dr. Ben Hillscamp.